All right, folks. So today I wanted to talk about off-season S&C, right? So off-season strength and conditioning. So I think a lot of people have this completely backwards. There's this probably idea that goes around, and I think it makes sense in athletes' heads, but it isn't quite right when you think about it. So a lot of people think, well, okay, it's the off-season. I don't want to lose out on what I had in season. So what you end up doing, or what athletes end up doing, at least in my experience when they come to me, what they've ended up doing is they try to recreate as closely as possible what they were doing in season, and they try to replicate as closely as possible what the demands of their sport are, which in a way makes sense, sort of intuitively makes sense, but you need to be in shape for your sport for sure in season, and in pre-season that's one of those things that you build towards. But off-season is the one opportunity you have to develop qualities that you can't push as hard in season, right? So if I was to use an example, let's say we're talking about maybe a football player or a rugby player, something like that. So you've got a long ass season. It's what, 30, 37 weeks, multiple matches, multiple games, at least, usually one match a week. Sometimes you're talking a couple. I used to coach a bunch of tennis athletes, and they would often have like competitions every single weekend for about 37 or 40 weeks of the year, sometimes double comps and midweek comps, a humongous amount of practice. So you're doing not only a humongous amount of games, but also a humongous amount of practice, loads of technical training, skills training in the week. What that means is that in season and even in pre-season, there's not a huge amount of opportunity for you to develop things like maximal strength. There's not a huge amount of opportunity to develop power. You can't really build much muscle in season because you've got so much cardio and other systems going on. There's reasons we'll talk about maybe in another video why doing that much cardio and other stuff interferes, but for the most part, just take me on my word that that's the case, all right? So when we have this like off-season kind of time, this is your opportunity to develop characteristics that you cannot really truly develop in season. So when I get a lot of my athletes and it's an off-season period, a true off-season period, I want to use that to do really classic, simple, basic strength training. You want to be doing your squats, your deadlifts, your bench press, maybe some leg presses or overhead presses. You want to be using this as an opportunity to develop your ability to produce force. You want to use it to do some of your more challenging plyometrics so that you can then learn to express that force quickly, okay? So this might be an opportunity for you to do bounds and drop jumps and single leg jumps and acute lateral zigzag bounds and all these really cool explosive plyometric drills, weighted barbell jumps, weighted squat jumps, all these things that you don't get a bunch of opportunity to do in season, at least not for much volume, right? You now get the opportunity to do them in your off season, and you don't have to worry about recovery, because you don't have to worry about, okay, if you train legs really, really hard on a Thursday or a Friday, well, normally in season you can't do that, because if you play on Saturday, Sunday, your legs are now too messed up and you can't sprint properly. But in your off season, you don't have to worry about that. So you can do heavy workouts. You can actually develop the strength that you need in your legs, the power that you need in your legs to actually sprint faster, to actually accelerate quicker in season. So the biggest difference that I see when I really think about amateur versus professional athletes is their ability to think long-term and structure this, okay? So what I mean by that is a lot of amateur or sort of lower level athletes, they want to just make their training super, super close to their sport all the time. But your more professional athletes, the athletes that understand the process, they will take the time in their off season to build the characteristics that they know are going to benefit them in the long term, So it's short term versus long term thinking. If you can start thinking about, okay, I don't just want to be the best player that I can now, I want to be the best possible player that I can be in 5 years or in 10 years. You get the idea? And then you start laying the characteristics of the strength and the power and the size that you need to actually compete in your sport, because it's a really short-sighted view. If you just think about the short term, you might get better for a little bit, and then you're going to hit this adaptive resistance. Your body's just not going to get better doing loads of the same thing over and over and over, and you're going to run into this wall. And then suddenly the guys that you're competing against, or the girls you're competing against, suddenly they're stronger and they're faster and they're quicker and they're accelerating more. Oh, and they're bigger and they're more agile. And suddenly it feels like you've got this insurmountable kind of hill to climb, which in a way you do, because you've wasted the last 3 years. So when you think about off-season training, it's got to be thinking about what are the characteristics that you need to develop long-term to succeed in your sport, and the characteristics that you can't develop when you're in season. So I hope that makes sense. Any questions, just ask them below, ask them in any of the comments, and I'll try and answer them as best as I can. But hopefully that just gives you a general idea about structuring off-season conditioning and off-season training for the most part.